Welcome back. The federal Liberals are taking aim at Conservative leader Andrew Scheer's absence from Pride parades. Today, Public Safety Minister Ralph Goodale tweeted, "To be a leader for all Canadians, the Conservative Party leader should now end his lifelong boycott of Pride events and explain whether he would still deny same-sex couples the right to marry," as he said in Parliament. Goodale attached this clip to a 2005 speech Scheer made in the House.
Two members of the same sex may use their God-given free will to engage in acts, to cohabit, to own property together. They may commit themselves to monogamy. They may pledge to remain in a loving relationship for life. In that sense, they have many of the collateral features of marriage, but they do not have its inherent feature. As they cannot commit to the natural procreation of children, they cannot therefore be married.
Scheer's Director of Communications, Brock Harrison, fired back at Goodale, tweeting, "Mr. Scheer supports same-sex marriage as defined in law and as Prime Minister will, of course, uphold it." Several high-profile Liberals, including Stéphane Dion, Dalton McGuinty, Paul Martin and Jean Chrétien, opposed same-sex marriage more than a decade ago. Oh, and so did Checks Hansard at Ralph Goodale. Now that prompted, if you're still with me, NDP leader Jagmeet Singh to release a statement criticizing Scheer's 2005 comments, writing, "This is exactly why, if Canadians deliver a minority government in October, I will not prop up Andrew Scheer and the Conservatives. We can't trust Mr. Scheer or his caucus to champion the fundamental rights of Canadians." So what does all of this tell us about the campaign that hasn't even started yet? Did the NDP leader just concede the election? It's time for the Power Panel. In Vancouver tonight, Tim Murphy is former Chief of Staff to Prime Minister Paul Martin, now with Macmillan Vantage. And in Toronto, Ginny Roth is with Crestview Strategies. Next to her, Andrew Thompson is Chief of Government Relations for University of Toronto and a former Saskatchewan Finance Minister. Hi, everybody. Nice to see you. Andrew, why don't I start with you, because I know we want to get into the nitty-gritty of the debate that took place today, but then this statement from Jagmeet Singh today, really jumped out at me. Essentially, he's saying, allowing for the chance of not winning the election and that he won't prop up Andrew Scheer's government. What do you make of that? That's for Andrew.
Well, I'm not sure what one says about that. I mean, it's probably a pretty realistic statement in terms of where he's coming from. I don't think there's a great expectation you're going to jump from 17 or 18% in the polls in third place party into government. It has happened recently, I guess. There's always that outside chance. But I think he's being really clear about the fact that if there is a minority government delivered, the NDP is going to be asking both the parties to move in their direction, not in cutting some other backroom deals, and that he's going to set a very principled approach on this. And that's very much what he's laid out here. So I don't think people are going to read much more into it other than that.
Okay, Ginny, let's get into the back and forth between the Conservatives and Liberals today, which played out primarily, of course, on Twitter, and the House isn't sitting, so that's where it's going to play out, I guess. What do you think the strategy behind Ralph Goodale's initial tweet was?
Well, I think it's pretty clear. Look, this is an issue that was settled years and years and years ago. This is a 15-year-old clip. And in fact, as the Director of Communications to the Conservative Party pointed out, a number of Liberals over the years had offside views on same-sex marriage. It's an issue that, frankly, a lot of Canadians have evolved on over the years, and it's been put to bed. It's been put to bed by Canadians, it's been put to bed by the Conservative Party in a vote of its members, and it's been put to bed by the leader, Andrew Scheer, who has categorically been clear on his position on same-sex marriage, which is that he supports it.
Do you think he's categorically clear there? I'm just going to ask as a follow-up here, because it says, the quote from Mr. Harrison says, "Mr. Scheer supports same-sex marriage as defined in law." And that's a very specific way of saying it. And he was on this show when Rosie was hosting it. I know she asked him a number of times, like, "Are you, do you support it as an institution?" I'm paraphrasing her. He has not come out and said that. It's very specific language there, right?
Yeah, I think we're talking about rights, right? I mean, Jagmeet Singh called out rights, and Ralph Goodale talked about rights, and that's what Andrew Scheer is talking about. He's supportive of the rights of all people to marry. He was also really clear in his comments. I think it was in reference to immigration policy, about how he views the sort of diversity of our population and the importance of those rights. Not only our population, but potentially the population that might come join us either as refugees or as immigrants. And if you look at the Conservative record on gay people internationally and our facilitating of their refugee status and immigration to Canada, if you look at fighting for gay rights on the international global stage, I mean, there's a really strong record to go on here, whether it's Andrew Scheer or former Conservatives. And so so, to your earlier question, why was it brought up? Well, we all know what happened this week. An ethics committee was called together to talk about a report from our federal ethics commissioner that was categorically clear that the Prime Minister violated our country's ethics and laws. And so I don't think there's any question why this was brought up today. It was meant to be a distraction. It worked, frankly. Certainly on Twitter it did. I don't think the average Canadian's following this. But if this is sort of the best the Liberals have to distract from their sort of scandal and what everyone's talking about when it comes to the Prime Minister's record, then I think the Conservatives are feeling pretty good today about their chances in this election.
Okay, let me ask you the same question, Tim. What was the strategy from your perspective from the Liberals?
Well, I think I think we've seen, and the Liberals have been talking about this for quite a while, fundamentally saying, look, there is a values debate that's going to be at the core of this election, and that goes through issues like climate change and the values around it, the values of openness, inclusiveness, and I think a little bit of kind of what's being pulled at here is the difference between what you tolerate and what you celebrate in values. And I think the language that is being carefully used by Andrew Scheer's Director of Communications, others, is the language of, well, we tolerate people. And I think it's all, and as opposed to celebrating the diversity and wonderful diversity that we have in this country.
Are you speaking about the Pride Parade, for example?
Well, that's exactly where I was going. So this is all in the context of, we had that great picture, to be fair, of Jagmeet Singh and Elizabeth May and Justin Trudeau all at the same Pride Parade together celebrating the progress we've made as a country and the unity that we bring to the values. Who was not there? Andrew Scheer. Who's never been there? Andrew Scheer. And I actually think, for me, there was a very illustrative part of that clip that you did not carry, which was the language where he compared the notion that a homosexual get married to calling, a tail on a dog a leg, which was, I think, a bit of an offensive an analogy to a very important issue. And look, I recognize, by the way, that people, I worked for Paul Martin, who actually passed the law that made
who was forced to pass the law, Tim. Forced to pass that law after dithering on it and sending it to the Supreme Court. Now, come on.
Yeah,
I mean, this is the piece.
I'll get you in a second, Andrew. I just want to let him finish. I'll get you in a second. Yeah. I'm guessing the point here is the idea of the argument the Conservatives are making is that positions evolve, right? And that they have for some Liberals as well.
Of course they do, and I agree with that. And they do evolve. The problem I think you've seen, and I saw that 2016 interview that Andrew Scheer did with Rosie on your show, he could not have been more uncomfortable in answering the question about whether he was supportive of same-sex marriage. And I think what we've seen is his views have not evolved. And I think that's what this gets to in terms of the values that the leader of a party and a potential prime minister brings to the table.
Okay, Andrew, go for it.
Well, look, I think what Canadians are looking for are people not to reopen these culture wars. And this is the very dangerous thing about what the Liberals are trying to do, or the Liberal war room is trying to do, which is create this culture war mentality that we've seen split apart the United States. People don't have to agree with the right to accept it. And I think that that's always been the Canadians' position, that there's going to be a diversity of views, but when rights are finally recognized, they're accepted. It doesn't mean everyone's opinion changes overnight on it. Ralph Goodale's opinion has apparently changed over the last 20 years. Andrew Scheer's opinion may not have changed over 15 years, but there's nothing that says that he will actively work to repeal those rights. And I think this is really where the problem is, though.
Them, right? There is a constituency of Canadians who are.
So this is exactly the question. Yeah. This is exactly the question because, just this morning, in fact, in The Guardian, Selena Cesar-Chavanis had an interesting comment about one of the problems with the Liberal Party right now. And that's that it talks a good game but doesn't actually do anything. And that's certainly true when you look at gay rights. When you look at what this government has done, yes, it's apologized for decisions made generations ago, but hasn't done anything on the blood ban, hasn't done anything on conversion therapy, hasn't really done anything for the trans community. It's gone to the Pride parades long enough to be there for the photo op, and that's it. And I think that this is where it starts to wear thin, as if they're saying, judge us by their deeds. What are the deeds?
Well, look, I think the key thing here is that you use your earlier question, why did this come up today? We saw this happen in Alberta, right? I mean, Rachel Notley was sort of flailing. She did not have a lot to go on. She didn't want to run on a record. She didn't want to run on policy. So what did she run on? She attacked Jason Kenney for social issues and for sort of historic comments that were just not relevant to the people of Alberta on a day-to-day basis.
And also an RCMP investigation that was going on, into the way in which his leadership.
She spent
right?
Almost
I take your
every
point.
day
Yeah.
of the writ talking about views on same-sex marriage,
Well, she actually
abortion.
had a record on that. She actually had a record of advancing those causes. I mean, this is something the Trudeau government can't point to.
Fair enough, but it was a personal attack, right? I mean, the substance of her day-to-day exchanges on that campaign were personal attacks, and Albertans just were not there for it. And I don't think Canadians are here for it. And if every day on this election goes like today did, I think the Conservatives will be thrilled with that, because they're going to talk about their platform, they're going to talk about their plan for Canada. Andrew Scheer is going to be the optimistic, sunny candidate that, frankly, Justin Trudeau was in the last election. And I think a lot of Liberals are looking around and going, is this what we're running on? Really? Is this going to be the election?
I guess that's what I wonder. Like, if I'm looking at this from a sort of strategic point of view, and I understand that there are legitimate issues at stake here, but, does it work, essentially? Tim, what do you think?
Well, I think it only works if it matches some themes that Canadians think are important. And the question, I think, fundamentally is, from an electoral point of view, are there a set of values that certain Canadians think are important? I mean, obviously, those values might vary, too, depending on the communities that you're talking to, the communities available to you as voters. I mean, I think unquestionably we're going to have some important discussions on other issues, economic issues, the government's significant move to bring kids out of poverty, 850,000, the middle class narrative. I think even questions, of affordability, of an economic growth, of shared prosperity, and of climate change are all going to be real issues.
The allegation here is this is kind of a cheap shot, right? Like, that's what the Conservatives are saying. It's a cheap shot to try and turn the page.
Yeah, but hang on a
what do you
second.
think?
Hang on. The hypocrisy of that attack is absolutely amazing to me, because I seem to recall the Tories running the top 100 mishaps or something every day on Twitter for the period 100 days leading up to the writ call, in which there are complete fabrications in it, but they are all attacks on things that are, I think, unfair, low blows, the kind of politics that they're now criticizing. So I think it's a bit rich for me for them to attack the Liberals that way. All that being said, this is fundamentally, I think, about a particular notion around values. It'd be very simple for Andrew Scheer to deal with this. He'd just say, look, my views have changed. I fully support this. Even Doug Ford, for example, in Ontario, who I think had similar discomfort, nonetheless found a way to go to a Pride parade. Why can't Andrew Scheer?
And last word to you,
interesting.
Andrew.
It's interesting. In Calgary, the gay and lesbian community has now decided to ban all political parties from participating, in part to get rid of this kind of wrap yourself in the rainbow flag and somehow pretend that you've delivered for that community. And I think this is where we've got to move beyond this kind of very tokenistic approach to dealing with minority communities. And really, they're going to start demanding, if the Liberals are going to wrap themselves in these kind of issues, they're going to demand progress on these issues. And we're not seeing either one of the other two parties actually step forward on that now. If that's where this debate moves to, that's a great thing for Canadians. If, however, it is just an attempt by the Liberal war room to create a greater schism and more division within the electorate, then I think we're going down a path that's very dangerous, and we can just look south of the border to know how that's going to end. All
right, I have to leave it there, but thank you so much to all three of you for your time this evening. Thanks to our power panel, Tim Murphy, Andrew Thompson, and Ginny Roth. Hi, I'm Vashi Capellos, host of Power in Politics. See more of our show by subscribing to the CBC News channel or click the link for another video. Thanks for watching.